The camera lights burn bright, the studio air tense with the kind of anticipation only live television can summon. Chris Wallace leans forward in his chair, voice sharpened to a blade's edge. With that trademark smirk of certainty, he delivers the line that slices through the air. "Congresswoman, isn't it true you're dodging the real issue here?" For a heartbeat, it feels like the whole room tilts. The challenge isn't just a question, it's a dismissal, a public stripping of credibility, a subtle reminder of who's supposed to hold the upper hand. His tone is clinical, almost surgical. He's not asking, he's declaring. The camera cuts to Jasmine Crockett. She sits tall, her expression calm, almost unreadable. To the casual viewer, it might seem she's hesitating, but then freeze frame. The screen halts mid-breath. A voice cuts in. This was the moment the studio went silent. The narration lingers over Wallace's narrowed eyes, his posture leaning in like a predator closing in on prey. But beneath that image lies the crackle of something else, a challenge that may have gone too far. And the silence that follows is not weakness, its power being quietly drawn in like a bowstring pulled back. Viewers at home shift in their seats. Social media users lean forward with their thumbs hovering over their keyboards. In a country where every soundbite is dissected, every pause is magnified, this one pause is electric. Because everyone watching knows, a pause can mean collapse, or it can mean the setup to something unforgettable. The narrator's voice sharpens. Wallace thought he had cornered her, but he didn't realize he had just built her stage. Tension hums. The lights, the silence, the stakes all converge into a single fragile moment. The studio audience holds its breath, and so does the nation. What will she say? Will she lash out? Will she stumble? Or will she transform this dismissal into something that leaves even Chris Wallace, the veteran of countless interviews, with nothing left to say? The freeze melts away, time resumes, and Crockett inhales with the steadiness of someone who has weathered storms before. Her lips part. But what came out next, the narrator whispers, was the kind of calm answer that can freeze history itself. To understand why Chris Wallace's challenge mattered, you have to look beyond the four walls of that studio. This wasn't just a question fired across a polished news desk. It was the familiar weight of doubt that so many Americans, women, immigrants, working-class voices, people of color feel pressing on them every time they dare to step into the public square. Wallace's push wasn't only for Crockett to answer. It was, in its tone, a demand for her to justify her very presence. And that's why this moment pulsed with such electricity. Because Jasmine Crockett wasn't just sitting in that chair for herself. She was carrying the echoes of every time a voice had been dismissed as unqualified, every time a contribution was waved off as dodging the real issue. In that instant, the stage wasn't just a cable news set, it was America itself, with its old debates about who gets to speak, who gets to lead, and who gets to define the truth. Wallace knew what he was doing. He had framed the question not as an inquiry, but as an indictment. He wanted to tighten the box around her, to make her answer under the shadow of his authority. And to millions watching, it felt like the same old story. The gatekeeper reminding the newcomer of the rules. But Crockett wasn't new to this kind of pressure. She had lived it, she had grown in it. And at that table, under those lights, she was about to show that calm doesn't mean weak, it means unshakable. The stakes, then, were bigger than sound bites. They were bigger than ratings. They touched the raw question of identity and belonging. In America, could someone who looked like her, who carried the histories she carried, not only withstand this kind of condescension, but also flip it into a moment of triumph? For her supporters, this wasn't just about politics. It was personal validation, the proof that calm dignity can answer arrogance, and that representation is more than a slogan. And make no mistake, people were watching closely. Phones buzzed on coffee tables. Clips were already being clipped, live-streamed, and time-stamped for Twitter. There's a particular kind of silence that grips a live broadcast when the audience senses something viral is about to be born. And that silence was in the air. Because this wasn't just about Chris Wallace versus Jasmine Crockett. It was about the clash between two Americas. One that tries to police who belongs in the conversation, and another that insists with rising confidence that no gatekeeper can silence the truth forever. And what happened next, the narrator, in tones, voice almost trembling with suspense, wasn't just about an interview. It became a moment America couldn't stop talking about. The scene tightens, the air heavier now. Crockett adjusts her posture, the calm before release. Wallace braces, expecting compliance, but the audience by now knows better. Something more is coming. Something no smirk, no dismissive phrasing could possibly contain, because sometimes the most ordinary question becomes the spark for the extraordinary answer. And in this studio, on this night, that spark was about to ignite. Chris Wallace didn't stumble into this moment by accident. His career has been a long march across America's television screens, carrying with it both respect and resentment. For decades, Wallace has played the role of the unflinching interrogator, the man who could grill presidents, cabinet members, and world leaders with the poise of someone who knew his place in history. He carved out his reputation on sharp questions and sharper interruptions, mastering the art of the gotcha moment, the single clipped phrase designed to corner, expose, and humiliate. To many, that made him a titan of journalism. The son of broadcasting royalty, Wallace inherited not just a name but a posture, polished, authoritative, commanding. He learned early that television isn't about conversation, it's about theater. And in theater, he relished the part of the skeptic who could slice through any veneer of confidence. His style became iconic, the arched eyebrow, the clipped tone, the perfectly timed smirk that suggested he already knew the answer before the question even left his lips. But behind that polish lies an arrogance that has long shadowed his career. Wallace thrives on confrontation, but not always for truth's sake. Too often, his gotcha questions land less as revelations and more as dismissals, a reminder that he holds the gavel, that the guest is on trial. For politicians insulated by privilege, that challenge can be a test of their polish. But for voices outside the establishment, it often feels like something more sinister, a gatekeeper reminding them of their place. His critics recall countless examples. The way he pressed candidates of color harder, framing their answers with suspicion rather than curiosity. The way he cut off women mid-sentence, insisting on his narrative even as they fought to reclaim their own. The way he reveled in the pause, that split second where his target stumbled and he leaned back triumphant. And yet, for all his pride in being tough but fair, Wallace has often been blind to the struggles of those he questions. He has never known what it means to walk into a room already underestimated, to have your intelligence doubted before you speak a word, to have your calm mistaken for weakness. His world has always rewarded his confidence. His career has always validated his certainty, and so he never stopped to consider how his style landed on those fighting battles he could not imagine. This is what made his confrontation with Jasmine Crockett so charged. Wallace believed he was playing the same old game: push hard, corner the guest, break them into a soundbite. But Crockett wasn't just another politician to spar with. She embodied the very people his tone had dismissed for decades. For her, this wasn't theater. It was history pressing down in real time. That's the irony of Wallace. He is both the consummate professional and the arrogant antagonist. He believes he is holding power accountable, yet he often shields power by dismissing its challengers. He prides himself on being above the fray, yet he cannot see when his own tactics become part of the problem. And so, as he leaned forward that night, delivering his pointed jab with the certainty of a man who had done it 1,000 times before, Wallace had no idea what he was walking into. To him, it was another performance. To Crockett, it was the opening act of something larger. The narrator's voice cuts in. He had spent decades mastering the art of the corner. But what he didn't realize was that this time, the corner had already been dismantled. He wasn't about to trap her. He was about to spotlight her. This contrast, the veteran journalist, polished yet blind, versus the rising congresswoman, underestimated yet unshakable, is what turned a single interview into a cultural event. Wallace believed he was the author of the drama. He didn't know that history had already cast him as the foil, and when the silence hit, when the weight of his question hung in the air, it wasn't just a pause in the conversation. It was the pause of a career's worth of arrogance finally colliding with a presence that refused to bend. What came next would not only define the interview, it would remind millions watching that even the most seasoned gatekeepers can misjudge the moment, and that dignity, once unleashed, can render even the sharpest gotcha utterly powerless. Jasmine Crockett's rise was never meant to be smooth. From the beginning, she was walking into rooms where the odds leaned against her, where her name wasn't in the Rolodex of power, and where her voice had to fight through walls of doubt just to be heard. But if there's one thread that runs through her journey, it's this. Every barrier she faced only sharpened her resolve, every dismissal only hardened her voice, every underestimation prepared her for the exact moment she would need unshakable. Calm. She grew up in a world that didn't hand out shortcuts. Her family's story echoed those of countless working-class Americans, immigrant neighbors, single mothers juggling shifts, young people told their dreams were too big for the zip code they were born into. It was a world where you learned early that dignity wasn't given, it was demanded, where being overlooked became routine, and where the small victories the scholarship earned, the community meeting attended, the door-to-door canvassing for local causes felt monumental because they came at such cost. For Crockett, education was not just a ladder, it was a fight. In classrooms where too few looked like her, she learned the sting of being underestimated. Professors doubted her grit, classmates underestimated her intellect. But with every low expectation, she sharpened her edge. Law school wasn't a rite of passage, it was survival training. And when she stepped into courtrooms defending those who couldn't afford polished attorneys or political favors, she became fluent in a language Wallace could never truly understand. The language of the overlooked demanding justice. Her entry into politics wasn't born out of ambition for titles. It was born out of frustration. Too many communities like hers were ignored until election season, then forgotten the moment ballots were counted. She knew the gap between campaign promises and lived reality. And so she stepped into the arena, not with the polish of a dynastic name, but with the rawness of lived experience. Grassroots was not a slogan for her, it was her origin story. Her campaign trail was a study in uphill battles. She faced questions no one else faced. Was she too radical, too young, too loud, too black? Every interview, every debate, every handshake carried the unspoken test. Prove that you belong here. Prove that your voice deserves the same weight as theirs. But Crockett didn't just answer those questions. She transformed them. Each insult became a talking point. Each doubt became a challenge. Each whisper of "she can't" became fuel for "watch me." And when she finally took her seat in Congress, she carried into that chamber not the entitlement of someone bred for power, but the grit of someone who clawed her way into it. She brought with her the cadence of community meetings, the fire of courtroom defenses, the rhythm of a woman who had fought her entire life not to be silenced. It is this journey that framed the silence in that studio. Because when Chris Wallace leaned in with his dismissive jab, Crockett wasn't just hearing him. She was hearing every echo of every time she had been underestimated before, and she knew with a steadiness that comes only from a lifetime of struggle that the silence wasn't his victory, it was hers. The narrator leans into the words, every dismissal, every underestimation prepared her for this moment. Her calm wasn't hesitation, it was memory. The memory of doors closed, of rooms where her presence was questioned, of voices telling her she would never make it here. The difference now was that the cameras were rolling, the lights were bright, and the nation was watching. That's why empathy for Crockett runs deep among those who see themselves in her story. For immigrant families who know what it means to be told to wait your turn. For working-class parents who know what it means to raise children in a system designed to doubt them. For women who've had to speak twice as loud just to be heard half as much. Crockett's silence wasn't just her silence, it was theirs too. And when she finally opened her mouth, her words wouldn't belong to her alone. She had become, in that studio, a vessel, a carrier of something larger than herself. And Wallace, with all his polish, with all his certainty, had no idea that his question had just unlocked not a stumble, but a storm. Because resilience doesn't shout. It waits. It steadies itself. It gathers. And then, when the moment arrives, it speaks with a power no smirk can erase. And as Crockett drew her breath to answer, that lifetime of struggle, that catalogue of dismissals, that reservoir of grit, stood right behind her. The stage was no longer Wallace's. It was hers, and she was about to show that calm is not weakness, but the sharpest weapon of all. Chris Wallace wasn't finished. His first jab had landed with the weight of authority, but Crockett's silence, her unbroken calm, unsettled him, and so he doubled down. He leaned forward, voice edged with impatience, pressing harder. "Congresswoman, you're avoiding the real issue. The American people deserve straight answers, not talking points. Isn't it true you're dodging accountability?" The words hit the table like a gavel, sharp and deliberate. He was pushing her toward the corner he had drawn, hoping the pressure would make her fold. To the audience, the tension was palpable. This was Wallace in his element, squeezing, needling, demanding. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch, not once. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes steady on his. The calm in her face wasn't weakness. It was control. "Mr. Wallace," she began, her voice even, measured and unhurried, "I think the American people deserve more than questions framed to assume guilt before an answer is even given." The air shifted. It wasn't the thunderclap rebuttal some might have expected. It was sharper, quieter, pointed without raising a single decibel. Wallace blinked just for a moment before recovering. He fired again, raising his voice slightly, layering in the accusation. "So you're saying you're above answering direct questions? That's exactly the problem, politicians refusing to take responsibility." Crockett didn't break eye contact. Her tone remained steady, almost surgical, in its precision. "What I'm saying," she countered, "is that responsibility requires truth, not traps. And I will not play into a narrative designed to distort rather than to inform." The suspense in the studio thickened. This was no longer a simple interview. It was a duel of composure. Wallace pressed, trying to escalate. Crockett refused to be dragged into his rhythm. She spoke with the cadence of someone who had trained in storms far harsher than this. A lawyer who had held her ground in courtrooms. A congresswoman who had defended herself against louder voices. A woman who had carried the weight of underestimation. Her entire life. Viewers at home could feel it too. On Twitter, the comments lit up in real time. "She's not cracking. Look at her calm. Wallace can't shake her." Every second, Crockett held her poise. The imbalance grew clearer. Wallace's urgency looked like desperation. Crockett's stillness looked like strength. He tried one last pivot, voice cutting like a whip. "Congresswoman, the American people are tired of evasions. Will you answer the question directly, yes or no?" And that was the moment. The trap was fully set. The demand for a yes or no answer, the oldest trick in the arsenal of gotcha journalism. The audience leaned forward, bracing for the snap, the stumble, the collapse. But Crockett didn't give him what he wanted. Instead, she leaned in ever so slightly, her tone unwavering. "The American people," she said, "are tired of being spoken to as though they can't recognize when a question is designed to mislead. They deserve honesty. And honesty is not a yes or no trick, it's the truth in full." A hush fell. The suspense was unbearable. Viewers weren't asking whether she would answer anymore. They were asking something else. How long can Wallace keep pushing before he realizes he's already lost control? The narrator's voice slid in, heavy with anticipation. Will she snap, or will she rise above? That was the question hanging in the air, and as the seconds ticked by, it became clear. Calm was her weapon, and Wallace had no defense against it. For a moment, everything stilled. The cameras hummed, the lights glared, and Chris Wallace's demand for a yes or no answer still lingered in the air like smoke. It was the classic setup, a corner carefully drawn, a trap baited and waiting. And yet Jasmine Crockett didn't step into it. She sat back ever so slightly, gathered her breath and delivered a response so measured, so devastatingly precise, that the entire room seemed to shift on its axis. Her voice was calm, unhurried, but each word carried the weight of someone who had borne these kinds of dismissals her entire life. "You know, Mr. Wallace," she began, "I grew up being told I had to work twice as hard for half the credit. I entered courtrooms where my very presence was questioned before I opened my mouth. And even here in Congress, I've been underestimated before I've even had the chance to speak. So when you ask me for a yes or no answer to a question that assumes guilt, You're not really asking for truth. You're asking me to confirm the doubts of those who've never believed voices like, "Mine belong here in the first place." The words landed softly, but the impact was seismic. Wallace blinked, his lips parting slightly as if to interject, but Crockett didn't rush. She paused just long enough to let the silence underscore her point. "What the American people deserve," she continued, her tone gathering strength, "isn't another soundbite. They deserve leaders who will tell them the truth, even when it doesn't fit neatly into a trap of yes or no. Because life isn't yes or no. Justice isn't yes or no. Accountability isn't yes or no. It's complex, it's layered. And when you reduce it to anything less, you're not informing them, you're insulting them." The studio fell utterly silent. Viewers at home could almost hear the weight of her words pressing down through the screen. She wasn't raising her voice. She didn't need to. Her composure became the microphone drop, her restraint the thunderclap. Wallace shifted in his chair, clearly thrown. He had played this game before countless times, but rarely had anyone dismantled the rules of engagement so elegantly, so calmly, and so publicly. His smirk was gone now, replaced by the faintest crease of discomfort. Crockett pressed forward, her voice steady as a heartbeat. "I represent communities that are too often spoken over, too often dismissed. When you frame your questions as accusations, you're not just doing that to me, you're doing it to them, and I refuse to validate that. My responsibility isn't to play your game. It's to tell the truth in full. And the truth is bigger than a headline, bigger than a clip, and certainly bigger than a gotcha." She let the word hang in the air. Gotcha. The very word that defined Wallace's career turned back on him with surgical precision. A murmur rippled in the studio. Technicians, staffers, even producers could feel it. This wasn't just a response, it was a redefinition of the entire exchange. Then came the pause. Crockett leaned back, folded her hands, and simply looked at Wallace. She didn't fill the silence. She didn't need to. The silence was hers now, not his. And the effect was devastating. For years, Wallace had wielded silence like a weapon, letting it expose the nerves of his guests. Tonight it had been stolen from him. The narrator's voice cut in, low and electric. This wasn't anger, this wasn't evasion, this was dignity, weaponized, and in that studio the silence spoke louder than any outburst ever could. Wallace cleared his throat, fumbling for the next line. "Well, Congresswoman, that's—" But his voice faltered. He had expected defensiveness, maybe outrage. What he got instead was composure so unshakable it rendered his arsenal useless and UI. Crockett wasn't finished. She leaned in just slightly, her tone soft but piercing. "The American people are smarter than they're given credit for. They can see when someone is trying to twist a conversation into a trap. They don't need more theater. They need honesty. And if honesty means refusing to box truth into a yes or no answer, then I'll take the criticism. Because at the end of the day, the people I serve deserve better than a performance." It was the final strike, a calm dismantling not only of Wallace's question, but of the very foundation of his style. She hadn't just answered him. She had reframed the entire exchange into something universal, something that reached beyond her and beyond him. In living rooms across America, jaws dropped. Clips were already being cut, subtitles slapped onto the footage. On Twitter, the hashtags were forming. Yun Carmancer, Yun Crockett Mick Drop, Indignity wins. The moment had slipped out of Wallace's hands and into the bloodstream of a country hungry for validation, for inspiration, for proof that dignity can indeed triumph over arrogance. Back in the studio, Wallace sat momentarily frozen. His legendary composure cracked under the weight of Crockett's calm. The veteran interrogator looked for once like the one being interrogated. And in the silence that followed, even the hum of the cameras seemed to bow to her. The narrator whispered, "He thought he had cornered her. Instead, she had cornered him." With nothing but truth, spoken softly, she froze the studio in silence. The pause stretched. Wallace blinked again, searching for footing. But the nation had already moved on. This wasn't his moment anymore. It was hers, and what happened in the minutes that followed would ignite a storm beyond that studio, a storm that no smirk, no edit, no rebuttal could contain. The moment the cameras cut, the echo had already begun. By the time Crockett walked out of the studio, Twitter was on fire. The clip of her response, calm, steady, devastating, spread like wildfire across timelines. One user captioned it simply, "This is how you dismantle arrogance." Another, "She didn't just answer, she educated." Within an hour, hashtags were trending. Chas Crockett mic drop, studio silence, dignity wins. Young voters clipped the exact pause where Wallace's confidence faltered, looping it with slow-motion text overlays. The second he realized he lost. Immigrant communities celebrated the subtle but seismic way she turned a dismissal into empowerment. And women's groups, long familiar with the quiet demand to stay calm under fire, rallied around her performance. It wasn't just a response. It was a masterclass in grace under pressure. The clip leapt from social feeds to news desks. Morning shows scrambled to feature it. Pundits who had spent years critiquing her every move suddenly had to acknowledge the obvious. She had just owned one of the toughest interviewers in American media. Her CNN commentator admitted, "I've seen Wallace unnerve presidents. Tonight it was Crockett who had him speechless." But it wasn't just the media elite. It was the people on the ground who gave the moment its power. College students quoted her line, "Life isn't yes or no" on TikTok, pairing it with music and quick cuts of their own lived contradictions. Student debt, broken healthcare promises, the complexity of everyday survival. Activists shared her dismantling of the gotcha question as proof that refusing the rules of a rigged game is, itself, a victory. Immigrant families from Houston to Queens replayed her words in living rooms. Parents nudged their children, saying, "Listen, this is what it means to answer with dignity." For those who had been told their accents, their skin, their gender made them less credible, Crockett's refusal to bend was more than a TV moment. It was representation in real time. Not everyone was cheering. Conservative commentators tried to spin her answer as evasive, accusing her of dodging, but the spin didn't stick. Because the silence, that unforgettable silence, betrayed the truth. Viewers saw Wallace falter, not her. And in politics, perception is everything. By evening, talk shows were dissecting every second of the exchange. Clips of Wallace's blink, his stumble, his throat clearing replayed like forensic evidence. Memes flooded Instagram. Wallace holding a deck of gotcha cards, Crockett calmly sweeping them off the table. One viral caption read, "When they underestimate you, stay calm. That's the kill shot." And the reaction wasn't just cultural, it was political. Colleagues in Congress weighed in, some with open admiration. A progressive senator tweeted, "Jasmine Crockett reminded us all tonight that dignity is power. Silence can be louder than shouting." Women of color across the political spectrum praised her as a model of resilience. Even skeptics admitted. Privately, Wallace had been outmaneuvered. The story bled into op-eds by morning. The New York Times ran with the headline, "Calm wins. Crockett's answer redefines political TV." The Guardian called it a mic drop without raising her voice. And on late-night comedy, hosts mimicked Wallace's flustered pause, drawing laughter from audiences who knew exactly what clip they were referencing. For Crockett's supporters, though it wasn't entertainment, it was vindication. They had watched her be interrupted, dismissed, doubted. And now the calm clarity of her words had frozen an entire studio, and by extension, the country. The narrator's voice swelled, cinematic and charged. It was never just about an interview. It was about every woman told she was too emotional. Every immigrant told to keep their head down. Every black leader questioned harder, doubted longer, respected less. Crockett's calm had become their calm. Her silence had become their thunder. And yet beneath the praise there was a tension. Because moments like this don't just end. They ripple, they build. They create expectations, alliances, enemies. The question was no longer whether Crockett had won the night. The question was how far the shockwaves would travel and who would try to silence them. The narrator leaned in. What began in a studio chair was already spilling into the bloodstream of American politics. The clip had gone viral. The debate was shifting. But the real battle was just beginning. The clip of Jasmine Crockett's calm dismantling of Wallace didn't just echo in headlines. It reverberated in living rooms, classrooms, and conversations across the country. And as the dust settled, what emerged wasn't merely a gotcha reversal or a viral one-liner. It was something deeper, something that felt like a collective exhale after years of watching arrogance dominate the screen. Because Crockett's answer wasn't about out-shouting Wallace, she didn't meet sharpness with sharpness, or ego with ego. Instead, she chose the harder path, the one so often underestimated in politics and in life: dignity. Her words reframed the entire exchange. In that moment, she showed America that calm clarity can be more devastating than the most aggressive takedown. By refusing to play into the showmanship, she stripped Wallace's tactic of its power. His interruption became meaningless. His question became small. And her truth, measured, precise, and rooted in lived experience, became the only thing that mattered. The narrator's voice tightened, then lifted. Dignity over arrogance. Truth over theatrics, calm over chaos. For viewers who had spent years frustrated by politicians who dodge or collapse under pressure, Crockett offered a new template. Not polished spin, not angry escalation. Something cleaner, sharper, stronger. Restraint. And in that restraint there was triumph. It's a universal truth, one that transcends politics. We've all felt the sting of being dismissed, the frustration of being underestimated. We've all faced moments where someone with more authority, more spotlight, more arrogance tried to box us in. Crockett's calm response gave those moments a blueprint. It told every person watching, you don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to fight on their terms to win. You only need to stand steady in your truth. And that was why the silence mattered. The silence wasn't emptiness, it was power. It was the sound of arrogance collapsing in real time. It was the studio, and then the nation, realizing that Wallace's showmanship had been eclipsed by something stronger. The narrator's tone shifted, rising toward an emotional crescendo. This wasn't just her victory. It was ours. It belonged to every immigrant family who's been told their story was too complicated. It belonged to every woman told to control her emotions, while men raised their voices unchecked. It belonged to every black leader forced to carry twice, the weight just to be taken seriously. Crockett's composure was their mirror proof that dignity could silence even the loudest dismissals. In that way, the moment became more than political theater. It became a lesson, one that millions carried into their own lives. Teachers quoted her in classrooms. Activists used her words to inspire marches. Parents pointed to the clip and told their kids, "See." That's how you answer when someone tries to make you small. And that's the thing about political TV. Most exchanges are forgotten within hours. But some moments pierce deeper. Some moments carry the weight of something timeless. Crockett's calm was one of those moments. It reminded America that arrogance fades, theatrics crumble, but dignity endures. As the narrator closed the loop, the voice softened, but the words rang with clarity. In a country addicted to spectacle, Jasmine Crockett showed us that the strongest weapon isn't the loudest voice, it's the calm one, the steady one, the one that refuses to break, and then the promise, the invitation. If this moment taught us anything, it's that we don't just watch history, we carry it. Crockett carried hers into that studio, and tonight she carried ours too. And for once, arrogance lost, dignity won. The title said it all. Chris Wallace pushes Jasmine Crockett on live TV. Her calm answer left the studio frozen. Silent. And now you know why. It wasn't just the push, it wasn't just the challenge, it was the silence that followed. The kind of silence that isn't weakness, but strength. The kind of silence that makes even the most seasoned interviewer falter. Crockett's calm didn't just win the exchange, it reminded us what power looks like when it refuses to be rattled. In a world where arrogance often steals the mic, her dignity stole the spotlight, and that's why this clip became more than an interview. It became a story America couldn't stop replaying. The narrator's tone slows, deliberate, each word carrying weight. Because in a world of noise, silence, the right kind of silence can speak louder than anything. And that's where you come in. If you believe moments like this matter, if you believe dignity should triumph over arrogance, truth over theatrics, then help keep this conversation alive. Share this video with someone who needs to see it. Add your voice in the comments below. And if you want to be part of a community that celebrates not just the loudest voices, but the strongest truths, make sure you subscribe. Every time you watch, share, and speak up, you're pushing back against a culture that rewards spectacle over substance. You're proving that calm courage still has a place in our politics and in our lives. So stay with us, because the debates will get louder, the challenges will get sharper, and the dismissals will keep coming. But together, we can make sure dignity keeps winning.